After 6 games of the Fischer random match between Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen, Carlsen was leading. There'd been 3 draws, 1 win for Nakamura, 2 for Carlsen. So that was the situation as they went into the final day of the long rapid game. So 45 minutes on the clock, then 15 minutes for the rest of the move. So here's game 7. Here's the starting lineup. Try to familiarise yourself with that one. You know, what would you play here? Well, Nakamura claimed some central space. Pawn controls one of the central squares and opens up one of the bishops. And Carlsen didn't rock the boat too much. He played f6 just to support that pawn coming into the middle. So nice and solid. And here, well, the problem for white is that already pawn takes pawn is threatened. You know, there's no bishop to recapture here. So, you know, it seems a shame to have to defend that pawn. So Nakamura basically couldn't see anything better than just to exchange. So they've got, you know, a symmetrical pawn structure. So then the pieces came out. And here Nakamura played a move which to my eyes looks really bizarre. He threw the knight in d5. I mean, you know, he should probably just bring a knight out. But he played knight d5. And after c6 the knight simply had to go back again. And this has hardly improved the situation of these knights. I mean, this knight is probably going to go out to here anyway. But that pawn on c6 is actually very useful because it covers the outpost. So, very strange decision from Nakamura. He seems to be, you know, just kind of has this mentality, just moving forward, wants to press forward. And, well, Magnus is more measured. So g3, trying to allow the bishop out to h3, or indeed doing so. Which looks pretty nice, but actually Magnus just castled. Remember, that's the castling rule. The king and rook always end up on the traditional squares. And then Magnus just tucked his king away. So actually, well, the bishop isn't badly placed on h3, but black is fine. And now here, again, Hikaru played a move which to my eyes just looks so bizarre. I think he should just bring out his pieces. Bishop f2, or maybe knight f2. He played queen f2, lining up queen and bishop on this pawn here. Now we saw this, exactly the same idea, in one of the earlier games where he lined up with bishop and queen. In fact, it was game 4, the game he lost. That also didn't really bring much, wasn't very effective. And here, well, it's very easy for Magnus to block that. And if that knight is pushed out of the way, let's say b4, actually there's no good discovered attack for this knight. And you can just simply block this. But look at the queen. It treads on the toes of the knight and the bishop. So it just looks really bizarre. So coming back to the game continuation after knight c5. Knight c3, look, I mean, these knights could have ended up on these squares after just 2 moves, but the knight's gone around the houses. So basically, Carlsen is already ahead in development here. He's already castled, that's important, so potentially he can connect rooks. That rook is in play. Hikaru's king cuts the 2 rooks, and he's got to decide, do you go kingside or queenside? And black's pieces are simply more active on this very nice square. So here's the game continuation. Nakamura decided he had to get rid of that strong knight, but now, well, Carlsen is basically starting the middle game, while Nakamura has yet to develop his pieces properly. So, staking a claim in the centre, attacking pawn on e4. I mean, white doesn't really want to have to defend that. You might trade, you might even push on, depending on how white plays, but Nakamura decided to exchange. And if he castles queenside, So it brings the rook here. And suddenly this could be very nasty. The queen, knight, potentially a rook as well, and the bishops pointing in the right direction. So I'm not surprised that Nakamura declined to go for that and played knight g4 instead. And now Magnus played d4. Well, that cuts out the bishop from the game, so it looks like a good idea. Also makes room for the bishop. And here, well, Nakamura simply brought the bishop back to g2, which was maybe just a little bit too cool. It could have been the time here to put the brakes on. First of all, if knight takes pawn, then bishop d5 wins material. However, you can play queen takes in this position. And after queen takes queen, of course, bishop d5 looks terminal. But here, white can get away with, well, first of all, let's castle, let's bring the rook into play. And then knight here. And incredibly, yes, white is losing a piece, but he gets a lot of pawns in return. He's got 3 pawns already. After this, bishop takes g7, he's got 3 pawns. And actually, pretty decent drawing chances. I think it'd be very difficult for black to win that position. But Nakamura failed to appreciate the danger here, and this is already very, very good for black. So this knight is rather awkwardly placed. Rook c8, there's trouble here. So Nakamura makes sure that he's ready to castle on the king side. Let's see this in action, this is always good fun. Now Carlsen broke with e4. So as I said, Carlsen's basically started the middle game. Nakamura is still trying to get out of the opening because he hasn't developed properly, he hasn't castled. e4 is a nice break. I mean, a pretty obvious one, but still, if pawn takes pawn, d3 obviously opens up the c file. If bishop takes pawn, then bishop d5, pin and win, and well, you're going to take on e4, and this is tremendous for black. So Nakamura, after this pawn move e4, decided to castle on the king side. Now I think that's classic Fischer random castling. I'm going to do an action replay because that was good fun for those of you who aren't sure about the rules here. So basically, if you're castling on the queen side, the rook would come over here, and if you're casting king side, the king always ends up on the normal casting square, and the rook as well. King on g1, rook on f1. So let's just see it again in action. There we go. King goes to g1, rook f1. But of course this allows e3 hitting the bishop. Bishop goes back, and this is a tremendous position for black. White has to try and undermine the pawn on e3, otherwise he's utterly lost. But that takes time, and while white is playing c3 and knight f3, then black has time to storm the king side, and this is just horrible. Black can always open the king side. Bishop h3, bishop e6, well, you can see there's an open g file here. It's and still another lever with h4. It's horrible. And this rook still in the corner, you can see that bishop cuts the connection between the rooks. It's simply a dreadful position. Nakamura tried bishop e4. It's no great improvement. Let's just see how Carlsen just prized open the position on the king side. g4 doesn't make much difference. Bishop h7, connecting all the rooks, and just rook g8. Really, really simple. So after h4, Nakamura tried queen takes e3. Then came bishop h7. Rook f3 tries to kind of hold things together, but it's not happening. And that's a very calm move. I have to say, throughout these games, Carlsen has been really calm. Rook f8, just trading off this important defensive piece. There's an interesting novelty that is being employed in this match, that both players are attached to, well, they have little wristbands which measures their heart rate, or pulse rate, I think. And Nakamura's is consistently high, whereas Carlsen is pretty steady, actually. Yeah, Nakamura's is worryingly high at times in the games, actually. Just shows you what stress they're under. They've been threatening to use these heart monitors for years in chess tournaments. Finally they're doing it, and well, it adds something else to your enjoyment as a spectator as well, when you can see one guy really his pulse rate goes through the roof. But yeah, as I said, Carlsen is very, very cool, and he said he's actually kind of worked at this over the years, that to remain cool under whatever circumstances. I think it's probably in this position very easy to remain cool if you're playing with black, because this position can be won in so many different ways. So this queen just bouncing around here and also threatening to play queen d5 check, and this is terrible. And again the queen comes back to g8. It's very clever. He just wants to come back to d5, and well, when the queen interposes, then you trade and take the rook. Bishop h4 played, and I mean there are so many winning moves here, but just kind of interesting to see how Carlsen did it. So that was a forcing sequence, and now queen f1 check threatened. So the queen comes back, queen f4. Now this bishop is hit, and now Carlsen just takes a pawn. I mean, it's so cool. He realizes that he's in total control here, complete control, and he just doesn't go crazy at all. Queen d3. Obviously, if that's taken, we've got a rook e1 check. And now here's a nice moment. Carlsen doesn't hurry. He just puts the king in the corner, and then puts the bishop back. So that means that now the rook is ready for action, and there'll be no surprise checks on the background because the king is completely secure. That bishop just tucked away, and of course maintaining the defense of that pawn on h2. So these are the final moves of the game. Queen e1 check. Obviously if that's taken, then the rook recaptures. And here Nakamura resigned. Yeah, why now and not earlier? Well, here it really is over, because the bishop is attacked and it simply doesn't have a good square. For example, bishop g5, rook g8. When the bishop moves, rook g1. Bishop f4. Queen e4 check, and we'll take a bishop at the very least. What else have we got? Well, bishop d2, then queen d5 check, and for example, we could trade queens and just take that bishop. Well, an absolute rout in that game, and it just seems to me that in the opening, Nakamura was trying too hard. That's like a rush of blood to the head, knight d5, and after that Magnus very steadily just developed nicely, controlled the centre, and stormed through on the king side at the end. Very, very calm, sensible chess from Magnus Carlsen. So after 7 games he increased his lead. What would happen in game 8? I'll do another video on that in a second, but don't miss it. That's all I'm going to say.